Abdu'l-Baha, the Perfect Exemplar, The Life of Abdu'l-Baha, written by the Baha'i.org website. Birth of Abdu'l-Baha. On the evening of the 22nd of May, 1844, a significant moment in human history occurred. In the city of Shiraz, Iran, the Bab declared the beginning of a new religious cycle for the world. At midnight on that same evening, a baby was born in Tehran. Baha'u'llah, in honor of his own father, named his newborn son Abbas. But in time, Abbas chose to call himself Abdu'l-Baha, the servant of Baha, and through his life of service to humanity, became known as the living embodiment and exemplar of Baha'u'llah's teachings. Childhood. Abdu'l-Baha enjoyed a privileged childhood until fierce persecutions broke out against the Bab's followers, of whom Baha'u'llah was the most prominent. Baha'u'llah's incarceration for being a Babi marked a turning point for his family. Seeing Baha'u'llah in prison, his hair and beard unkempt, his neck swollen from the heavy steel collar, his body bent by chains, made an indelible impression on the mind of his 8-year-old son. In December 1852, Baha'u'llah was released from prison after 4 months. Almost immediately, he was banished from Iran with his family. They were never to see their native land again. On the trek to Baghdad, Abdu'l-Baha suffered frostbite and grieved over the separation from his baby brother Midi, who was not well enough to make the grueling journey. Soon after their arrival in Baghdad, another painful separation followed when Baha'u'llah retreated into the mountains of Kurdistan for a period of 2 years. With his beloved father away, Abdu'l-Baha occupied his time reading and meditating upon the writings of the Bab. Service to Baha'u'llah. When Baha'u'llah finally returned, the 12-year-old boy was overwhelmed with joy. Despite his tender age, Abdu'l-Baha had already intuitively recognized the station of his father. In the years that immediately followed, Abdu'l-Baha became Baha'u'llah's representative and his secretary. He shielded his father from unnecessary intrusions and the malice of those who wished him ill. Abdu'l-Baha became revered in circles beyond his father's followers, conversing with the wise and learned on themes and topics that occupied their minds. One commentary he wrote, while still in his teens, demonstrated his already profound knowledge and understanding and a striking mastery of language. Throughout their exiles, Abdu'l-Baha also assumed the burden of various negotiations with civil authorities. During Baha'u'llah's final banishment to Akka, Abdu'l-Baha continued to protect his father, took care of his followers, tended to the sick and the poor in the city, and held his ground on matters of justice with callous jailers, brutal guards, and hostile officials. Abdu'l-Baha's generosity of spirit, selfless service, and adherence to principle endeared him to those who came to know him, and in time won over even the most hard-hearted of enemies. The Center of the Covenant. In his most holy book, Baha'u'llah established a covenant with his followers, enjoining them to turn after his passing to Abdu'l-Baha, who he describes as him whom God hath purposed, who hath branched from this ancient root. Abdu'l-Baha's authority as the center of the covenant was also established in other texts, including Baha'u'llah's will and testament. From the time of Baha'u'llah's passing, Abdu'l-Baha oversaw the spread of his father's faith to new territories, including North America and Europe. He received a steady flow of pilgrims from both the East and the West, carried out an extensive correspondence with Baha'is and inquirers in all parts of the world, and lived an exemplary life of service to the people of Akka. Envious of Abdu'l-Baha's influence, his younger half-brother, Mirza Muhammad Ali, tried to undermine and usurp Abdu'l-Baha's authority. Efforts to stir up further suspicion against Abdu'l-Baha in the minds of the already hostile authorities resulted in restrictions that had gradually been relaxed over the years being reimposed. Although these attacks caused great pain to him and his loyal followers, they failed to cause lasting damage to the unity of the community or the spread of the Baha'i faith. Travel to the West. As early as 1907, Abdu'l-Baha had begun moving his family to Haifa, across the bay from Akka, where he had built a house at the foot of Mount Carmel. In 1908, turmoil in the Ottoman capital culminated in the Young Turk Revolution. The Sultan released all of the empire's religious and political prisoners, and after decades of imprisonment and exile, Abdu'l-Baha was free. Despite tremendous challenges, work on a tomb for the Bab had proceeded midway up the mountain in a spot designated by Baha'u'llah himself. In March 1909, Abdu'l-Baha was able to place the Bab's remains in the shrine he had constructed. The following year, Abdu'l-Baha departed Haifa for Egypt, where he stayed 1 year, spending his days meeting diplomats, intellectuals, religious leaders, and journalists. In the late summer of 1911, he sailed for Europe, stopping at the French resort of Thonon-les-Bains before traveling to London. On the 10th of September 1911, from the pulpit of the City Temple Church in London, Abdu'l-Baha gave a public address for the first time in his life. His subsequent month-long stay in England was filled with ceaseless activity, promoting Baha'u'llah's teachings and their application to many contemporary issues and problems through public talks, meetings with the press, and interviews with individuals. The days in London and then Paris set a pattern that he would follow throughout all of his travels. In the spring of 1912, Abdu'l-Baha journeyed to the United States and Canada for 9 months. He traveled from coast to coast, addressing every kind of audience, meeting people of all ranks and stations. At the end of the year, he returned to Britain and early in 1913 to France, from where he proceeded to Germany, Hungary, and Austria, returning in May to Egypt, and on the 5th of December 1913 to the Holy Land. Abdu'l-Baha's travels in the West contributed significantly to the spread of Baha'u'llah's teachings and the firm establishment of Baha'i communities in Europe and North America. On both continents, he received a highly appreciative welcome from distinguished audiences concerned about the condition of modern society, devoted to such concerns as peace, women's rights, racial equality, social reform, and moral development. During his travels, Abdu'l-Baha's message was the announcement that the long-promised age for the unification of humanity had come. He frequently spoke of the need to create the social conditions and the international political instruments necessary to establish peace. Less than 2 years later, his premonitions of a world-encircling conflict became a reality. The Great War. When the First World War broke out, Abdu'l-Baha's communication with the Baha'is abroad was almost completely cut off. He spent the war years ministering to the material and spiritual needs of the people around him, personally organizing extensive agricultural operations and averting a famine for the poor of all religions in Haifa and Akka. His service to the people of Palestine was honored with a knighthood from the British Empire in April of 1920. Final years. In his old age, Abdu'l-Baha remained remarkably vigorous. He was a loving father, not only to the community of Baha'is in Haifa, but to a burgeoning international movement. His correspondence guided global efforts to establish an organizational framework for the community. His interaction with a stream of pilgrims to the Holy Land provided another instrument for instructing and encouraging believers from around the world. When he passed away at the age of 77 on the 28th of November, 1921, his funeral was attended by 10,000 mourners of numerous religious backgrounds. In spontaneous tributes to an admired personality, Abdu'l-Baha was eulogized as one who led humanity to the way of truth, as a pillar of peace and the embodiment of glory and greatness. Abdu'l-Baha's mortal remains were laid to rest in one of the chambers of the Shrine of the Bab on Mount Carmel. This is the design for the Shrine of Abdu'l-Baha, which is currently under construction in Haifa, Israel. Once completed, it will be the final resting place for the remains of Abdu'l-Baha.